Hi everybody, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on the pre-mortem approach. My name is Susan Fletcher. I'm the communications lead for GIRI. I'm just going to run through a quick introduction and then I'll be handing over to Richard Davis and Lynden Haworth, who are our subject experts on pre-mortems. So just a few quick housekeeping points as we get started. The session is being recorded and we will make the recording available on our YouTube channel in a few days' time once we've had a chance to edit it. So you can view it there or share it with colleagues who aren't able to attend the session. Please use the chat function for any questions or comments during the session, and we will pick those up in a Q&A in the sort of last 10 or 15 minutes of the webinar. If you have any technical issues, please just try to leave the webinar and rejoin, and hopefully that will solve any technical issues. And if you could keep yourselves on mute during the session, obviously you can unmute when it comes to the Q&A at the end of the session to ask any questions, or we will just pick questions up from the chat function. I'm just going to run through a very quick introduction to GIRI, and for the benefit of those people who are new to GIRI or less familiar with us. So GIRI was founded in 2015. This year will be our 10th anniversary year, and the Get It Right initiative came out of research into the cost of error to the construction industry, which was carried out in 2015. So that identified the significance of the cost of error to the industry through direct and indirect costs, the cost of latent defects, and the cost of processing waste. So all of those accumulated to a significant over 20% cost to the industry, and GIRI got together to identify what we could do to tackle that and improve quality, productivity, sustainability and safety within the industry by reducing that cost and by reducing waste. So that's our strategic aim, and that's our kind of driving purpose as an organisation. GIRI's a not-for-profit membership organisation. We have about just over 120 organisations that are members of GIRI who all contribute towards that mission. So those include government bodies, major client organisations. GIRI's roots were in infrastructure, but we cut across various aspects of construction. So major infrastructure clients include HS2, Sizewell and Hinckley. And then we also have a lot of Tier 1 and Tier 2 contractors, architects, structural engineers, and then lawyers, insurance brokers, and SMEs, so smaller contractors, specialist organisations with a particular strength in technology as well. So there are numerous benefits to being a member of GIRI. We provide training, and the CITB funding is available for much of our training offer. We have a structured framework for applying error reduction in an organisation. We conduct research, so our recent technology report published just in December looked at the benefits of technology in error reduction. And then we have regular quarterly face-to-face member meetings and regular online webinars and other sessions that members can participate in. And all of this is driving towards improving productivity, safety, sustainability and quality within the industry, and driving an improved reputation for the construction industry. We have a number of working groups that our members are very welcome to participate in. We have a very active technology working group, which brings together construction organisations and technology firms to look at how technology can improve quality. We have an insurance working group. At the moment, they're very focused on developing an industry type mark. Our newly reformed Competency and Compliance Forum, born out of our work on the Building Safety Act, looks at how competency and compliance play a key role in avoiding error and meeting the regulations and standards of the industry. And then we also have a metrics research group. So we're working with Consig on the development of a cross-industry error reduction metric. We have mentioned our training. We have 4 CITB accredited training courses on different aspects of the competencies required for error reduction, focused on leadership, supervisory and management training, interface training, so tackling error across the interfaces between organisations and teams, and then a train the trainer offer for organisations that want to embed GIRI training across their organisation. We have a number of guides and research reports that we've carried out over the years, and these are available on our website. Our sort of flagship guide is the design guide, which is a really robust and comprehensive guide to embedding error reduction across your whole design process. And the GIRI framework, again, is a robust process for teams and organisations to embed error reduction, looking at root cause analysis, behaviours and interventions to lead to error reduction. We work in collaboration with a number of industry organisations and sector partners to drive forward our mission around error reduction. So working with organisations like Constructing Excellence, the CQI, Consig and others to bring our specialist knowledge to bear and collaborate. I'm now going to hand over to Lynden and Richard, who are going to talk us through a pre-mortem approach to error reduction.
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, just if I can introduce myself. My name is Richard Davis. I'm Assurance Director for Kier Construction and also a board member for GIRI. For extra content, I'd like to add that I joined Kier back in 1988, so I'll let you do the maths. Lynden.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Lynden Haworth. I'm Head of Assurance for Galliford Try Infrastructure, who I joined in 1991. So if you can do the maths for Richard, then subtract 3 and you can do the maths for me as well. So
perfect. So again, thank you for joining us. What we're going to do today is give you a free insight, a little peek into a key element of one of the GIRI training courses. That's the one that for leadership strategies to eliminate error for leaders of construction organisations. That might be a simple tool that you can use on your projects. Lynden and I have been members of GIRI since its inception and worked with others from Balfour Beatty and J.M. Bentley to develop this training back in 2018, in those sort of pre-pandemic years. GIRI secured funding from CITB to develop the training, and throughout that year, I think it was sort of on a bi-monthly basis, we workshopped the basis of the training that you got access to today. What we're about to share was a result of one of those proper collective light bulb moments where all of the experts in the room were wrestling with how to tackle the issue of planning to avoid error at an early stage of a project. And what Lynden and I are going to do is give you an inside look at an element of this course and how our thinking around how to reduce error developed. And hopefully, if you don't already do this in some form on your projects, you might give it a try, or hopefully will encourage you to look at other training that GIRI's got on offer. So the pre-mortem, this is where it all began. We were maybe 2 or 3 workshops in to this development of the course, and we're beginning to build a view on how we wanted to tackle the launch of a project with a collaborative workshop. A lot of us had been using tools like Last Planner with some success, and we're challenging the group on what would this look like from a quality perspective. And combined with the challenges we all had around capturing lessons learned, that seemed to be the sort of the burning topic of the day, and still is, I guess. This led us to Matthew Syed's and his book on black box thinking. Some had read the book and we started to kick around the concepts within it. And at this point, I think there is potentially an epiphany in that short moment, we had all saw the benefits of applying the concepts that Syed was proclaiming. And I don't think it's an understatement to say that those of us who didn't have the book went straight home and ordered it. I think that's a fair recollection, isn't it, Lynden?
Yep, I've got my copy on the table actually still. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think it was one of those moments when, as you say, Richard, we kind of all went away and kind of got a copy and kind of picked it up, and as well as the pre-mortem, there's a lot of other good sort of insightful kind of light bulb moments in that book, I think. And yeah, it's yeah, we're not here to obviously promote the book, but it's a thoroughly good read if anyone's kind of interested in it. And yeah, I mean, the concept of pre-mortem within the book is outlined by a couple of statements that I've kind of pinched sort of straight from the book, and I'm just going to kind of read those through really. But basically, with this method, a team is invited to consider why a plan has gone wrong before it's even been put into action. It's the ultimate fail-fast technique. The idea is to encourage people to be open about their concerns rather than hiding them out of fear of sounding negative. The pre-mortem is crucially different from considering what might go wrong. With a pre-mortem, the team is told, in effect, the patient is dead, the project has failed, the objectives has not been met, the plans have bombed, and team members are then asked to generate plausible reasons why. By making the failure concrete rather than abstract, it alters the way that our minds think about the problem.
Yeah.
So Richard mentioned, the sort of concepts that we were thinking about when we were developing the sort of idea of the training and kind of how pre-mortem kind of might be different to something that we kind of all kind of know and experience, which is the sort of lessons learned workshop. And we sort of tried to capture some of those differences kind of on the screen here. So for one thing, the pre-mortem is a tool that we use to look forward, whereas lessons learnt workshop is essentially something that's kind of looking back. And because of that, the pre-mortem gives us all a bit of a superpower to take into that sort of training or into that workshop, because experiences that we've got, that we've learned from projects or we've learned from our business, whether they be good experiences or negative experiences where things have gone well or where things have gone badly, you can take those experiences into the pre-mortem and use them as a planning tool for the future. And I'm not sure you could always sort of say the same thing about the lessons learned exercise, because certainly I've been in lessons learned sort of workshops where sometimes it kind of feels that experiences are kind of, rather than being your superpower, you kind of, there's a little bit of finger pointing going on and experiences are being scrutinized maybe rather than welcomed. And I think that then kind of leads on to a critical part of the pre-mortem aspect, in that it actually tries to create an ambience of sort of psychological safety. And there's a lot of talk around at the moment for the last few years about this concept of psychological safety in terms of being the absence of interpersonal fear. And it's a key driver within the pre-mortem, is that people have got to be able to attend that pre-mortem and speak freely without the fear of being sort of contradicted or being criticized for basically being honest and with their views. And again, lessons learned, I'm not sure that that's always conducted in a psychologically safe manner. Certainly I've been involved in lessons learned workshops in the past where you're kind of finishing off a project and a few things have gone wrong, and it kind of feels a little bit like there's a bit of a blame culture sometimes, and things aren't as psychologically safe as as they might otherwise be. Richard, I think maybe you've got sort of similar experiences, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, in that moment, it suddenly solved a problem that I've been wrestling with for years. And I'm sure anyone that sort of works in the assurance quality field will understand, is that capturing lessons learned is always a challenge. You have teams that are desperate to get ready for the next project. They may have even moved on, and you're bringing them back from their new project to go through that sort of workshop environment, or a post-contract meeting. And there's fatigue for the ones that are left around wanting to move on. As Lynden says, I think there is that sort of, can become a box-ticking process to match procedures that you've got within your organization without really capturing the value. And what we've recognized is that you can put individuals in a room of their peers and make them the expert in the pre-mortem. The experiences come flooding out. The pre-mortem provided us with a vehicle to challenge this, which flipped the whole process for me, which was really good.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And before we move into the pre-mortem and kind of how that actually sort of manifests itself and how to actually run that exercise, there's a couple of other points that we just need to sort of pick up on, and one of them is something that we call optimism bias. And I'm sure this is not a new concept to a lot of people, and there's a quote on the screen there that sort of says, there is a demonstrated systematic tendency for project appraisers to be overly optimistic. And that comes from a guidance note, which is a supplementary sort of guidance note to the Green Book, which is, sort of a treasury book in terms of how project appraisers kind of look at projects. And I'm sure, we've all been on projects or even in life generally where we have that tendency to be overly optimistic and think that actually on this project, even though some stuff went wrong on my last project, that's the same thing's not going to happen here. We have that view that, our glass is always at least half full, if not more, and that the same problems are never gonna bite us again. And that's something that we have to be really guarded against when we look at this pre-mortem exercise.
Yeah, and I sort of, our solution that came out of it, I just love the simplicity of it. As someone that's worked in the public sector for many years or worked with public sector clients, there is a recognition of optimism bias, but we don't actually practice it. And the pre-mortem approach encourages people to take off those rose-tinted glasses, in a sort of almost formal way, so that we can use it at the beginning of projects and challenge our thinking with the actual reverse of the optimism. Let's be pessimistic about the outcome of this project. So pre-mortem becomes a really good tool to opening up the conversation to what's on everyone's mind, but don't necessarily in a normal environment are comfortable to share. But it was the simplicity that I always liked.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So we're going to start to dive into the process itself a little bit. But first of all, there are a few rules that we kind of need to establish and kind of get our heads around, and we sort of try to capture that with sort of some images on screen there, and this is really all around the kind of the basic rules before you attend the pre-mortem. As you walk through the door, it's really important that you don't go into the session carrying an ego. It's really important that any personal baggage or any personal feelings about maybe it's the other people that are going to be in that pre-mortem workshop with you, whether it's because the client is in there, the designer, the contractor, the supply chain member. If you've got preconceived ideas about how the session itself is going to go, it's really, really important for the benefit of the pre-mortem that you leave all that opinion at the door and you sit and have basically candid conversations. Everyone in the room is equal, irrespective of title, irrespective of whether they are client or designer or, supply chain, doesn't matter. Everyone is equal. Everyone's got a voice and everyone's voice deserves to be heard. It's really important that everybody is honest, that we don't go into it with that optimism bias. And also it's really important to be candid. So, be straightforward, be blunt, but be truthful, because actually, there's no point hiding away feelings in the pre-mortem, because if we do, then we're not really going to get the outcomes that we're trying to generate. So there are some key ground rules that we've got to take into this as we sort of walk through the door.
And for me, the most successful workshops have been when the client's in the room. The workshops then can have a double edge. I talked a minute ago that we sort of were using collaborative tools. This introduced another dimension to that. The power to identify challenges on the projects at one side, but also creating that right collaborative culture on a project. We're all in this together approach.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Okay, so let's start to get into a kind of a, let's have a look at what pre-mortem is. And first of all, the thing that we've got to do is we've got to sort of think about the scenario that we are creating here. And if we go back to Matthew Syed's book and Black Box Thinking, and how he described the pre-mortem as being different from considering what might go wrong. With a pre-mortem, the team is told, as I said before, in effect, the patient is already dead, the project has failed, the objectives have not been met, and the plans have bombed. So the key to this is to fast forward to a future state and outline a situation where something has failed, something has gone catastrophically wrong. And that could be, you can use a pre-mortem for many different things. It could be that you're looking at a business strategy and you want to use the pre-mortem to interrogate and investigate it. More often, it's probably used at project level. And again, whether you consider the whole project or maybe a particular part of the project. And I think the key to this is to be able to, kind of focus in on the bits that are kind of relevant to you. Sometimes it might be that a whole project is too much for one pre-mortem. It might be better to pick a particular element that's concerning us and fast forward into the future and say, okay, what is it about this part of the project that has failed? because defining that failure event is absolutely vital to how we run the pre-mortem.
So as we developed it, what you could see was that we were beginning to engage with the simplicity of this approach. And really important that once you've used the tool, you can see the other opportunities for its use, not just for construction projects. I myself have deployed it when we're developing business improvement strategies with good success. I also hope that you're beginning to see that this is a risk management tool that uses a deep engagement with real issues. And again, it's an excellent tool for that collaboration piece that often needed at the very early stages of projects.
So once we've got in there, we've established the ground rules, we've established our failure event. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sit and we're going to think about the different concerns that we have as the team that are running the pre-mortem and trying to identify those. And to do that, we start off with individual members of the pre-mortem team. So everybody working alone to write down a number of concerns or failure scenarios that are basically that have contributed to that kind of failure event that we've described on the previous slide. So it's really important that when we do this, that we're not optimistic. Richard even said, it's an opportunity to be almost pessimistic and sort of think, if it can happen, it will happen, rather than, it might happen, but, hopefully not. This is absolutely warts and all. Do not be optimistic when you're writing down these individual concerns. And the other thing with it is to do this fairly quickly, because as an engineering kind of background team, quite often we're focused on solutions rather than the problem. As soon as we see the problem, we want to fix it. We want to come up with a solution. And sometimes we do that to the point where we haven't actually fully understood the problem before we're trying to actually fix it, because that's what we like to be as engineers. So hopefully you can kind of see from the graphic there on the right hand side, this is all about getting ideas down, and you can do this, I recommend you just do it on post-its. Every concern gets written down on a single post-it, whether that's a physical post-it or whether it's an electronic post-it that gets used with a mural board, doesn't really matter. But I know Richard's got some thoughts about kind of creating energy in a room with, doing these things in a certain way. But the really important thing is to basically list down as many concerns that you have about this failure scenario, and then we'll take it forward to the next stage.
Yeah, I can only reiterate what you're saying there, Lynden. My rules would be: do not overthink. Move quickly, generate that energy. I'm not a big fan of the mural. I know it gets everything into electronic and you can capture it, but post-its and people moving around gets a lot more engagement. And just reiterating again, don't try and solve the problem. You'll see as we go through that we'll engineer a solution to this. So you get opportunities to get to the solution. But what we've got to do to begin with is get to the nub of the potential issue to ensure that we can actually build the right solution. So that's good.
Okay, so that takes us sort of nicely on to the next bit, really, which is once we've got those individual concerns, we then start to look for common concerns. So by doing this, what we do is we sort of move into pairs or maybe into small groups, depending on how many people you've got in the room in the first place. But, pairs or small groups of 3 is great, to actually then start to compare concerns and determine if you've actually mapped out anything that is similar to what somebody else has got. So a similar failure scenario. And really importantly at this point is not to judge or not to rank. So if you see that somebody else has come up with an idea, no matter how silly you might think that idea might be, that's their valid idea. So it's really important that you don't judge, and it's really important that at this stage you don't try to rank those ideas into terms of which one has priority. This is simply taking individual failure scenarios and looking to see if there's any commonality with them. And again, it's really key to do this fairly quickly. We're looking for common concerns. We are not trying to solve the problem at this stage. And again, what I've just tried to show with this graphic here is, where somebody is writing on a dark blue post-it and somebody is writing on an orange post-it. Yes, they've got some ideas that are common, but over on the right hand side, they've still got some ideas, some thoughts that are unique to them, and that's absolutely fine. All we're trying to do here at this stage is to map to see where we've got common concerns within the sort of smaller teams within the main group.
Yeah, I guess the trick here is to avoid creating a really long list of potential issues, is to see the common ground. And, they might be calling it something slightly different, but it is the same. Let's get that up as a concern. The end game is to not try and boil the ocean. We need to get to 20% of the things that are going to have 80% of the impact, if not managed correctly. But you know what? Having run a few of these, in my experience, the list does actually turn out to be quite short and direct.
Yeah, I agree with that, Richard. Thanks. So then once we've got the common concerns, and as I said, some might be common, some we might still have some unique ones, then becomes the opportunity to prioritize concerns. So again, it's really important at this stage that the whole group comes together, because we're going to prioritize these concerns, or failure scenarios as we might call them, and we do that using something called the risk wall. And the risk wall sounds probably grander than it really is, because it might even just be a flip chart or a piece of paper stuck on the wall or a mural board. It can be many different things. So I've shown a typical example there on the screen. Basically what we've done is we've divided our board down into 4 quadrants. And if you look at the y-axis, we've got probability, and across the x-axis we've got impact. So basically what we're going to try and do here is we're going to basically post our concerns on the risk wall, determining which quadrant they fit in by, 1, how likely are they to occur, and 2, if they do occur, what's their impact going to be. So really important at this stage is that you don't fight for priority. Everyone's got a voice. So I've run these before, or I've been involved in these before, where you sort of think your own idea is it's the most important, it's the most probable, it's got the highest risk. You're trying to reach up into the top right hand corner, and everyone's trying to get their important idea up there. It's not about that. It's reflecting that everybody's ideas are just as important as yours, and everyone in the room should have a voice. So put the concerns up onto the board, do it accurately, but don't overthink every scenario. You can waste an awful lot of time when we're posting onto the risk wall, kind of debating whether something goes here, or does it go here, or is it slightly to the left, or is it slightly higher? The fact is, it doesn't really matter. It needs to be pretty accurate. You've got to get them in the right quadrant, but actually vying for position within a quadrant, as I say, don't spend too much time and effort worrying about if things are in exactly the right place.
Yeah, for me, this stage is about keeping or getting the list down to being short and manageable. As an example, we ran a pre-mortem on a hotel project with the customer. They were in the room, and it was strange in some respects because it resulted in everyone reaching the conclusion that potential leaks were the challenge. Leaks in different places, leaks in the roof, leaks in curtain walling, leaks in the plumbing. They were real problems amongst a wider set, but as we went through the workshop with the customer, we all began to realise that leaks were the biggest issue for them, and allowed us to keep that in focus. So the conversations shaped around how you engage, not necessarily with where you put the post-its on the board.
Yeah, and I think it naturally we're going to focus on the things that end up in the top right hand corner. So things that are likely to happen, they've got a high probability, but also they've got a high impact, because the chances are they're going to be the key concerns, the key failure scenarios. But as Richard sort of said there could be others, and just because you've got some that are in the top right hand corner doesn't mean to say that we ignore everything else. We should capture all this information, because it might well be that even things that have got less probability or less impact, we might look at those and say, do you know what, they're relatively easy to fix anyway. So they're quick wins, they're low-hanging fruit. So why wouldn't we sort of do those anyway? But obviously, the key concerns are up in that top right-hand corner. And depending on how long you've got to do your pre-mortem exercise and how many concerns you've got up in that top right-hand corner, you might want to address them all. You might want to pick the top 1 or 2. It really depends on how much time you've got in your session. But as I say, you can always come back and kind of pick up the other ones and sort of repeat the exercise. But for the purposes of sort of demonstrating this, we're going to sort of say, okay, we'll select 3 from that top right-hand corner, and then we'll sort of move those on to the next phase. So we've selected our 3, and now is the point where we're going to start to say, okay, what's actually causing these issues? Let's try and get to the root of the problem. So what we now do is we, again, working in, whether it's the whole group or whether we split down into sort of smaller teams. Again, there's flexibility with this. It might be, if you've not got many people in the room that have done root cause analysis before, you might want to do it as a whole team. If you've got 3 topics that you've picked off the risk board, you might want to split into 3 teams. Again, you can play with the numbers as you see fit. But what we're now going to get into is looking at some root cause analysis. And there'll be lots of people on this call that know more about root cause analysis than I ever will. And there's various techniques that are out there for doing root cause analysis, whether that be fault trees or fishbone diagrams or Pareto analysis. But one of the simplest ones, and actually because it's simple, one of the most effective in this case, is 5 whys. And the reason we use 5 whys is, 1, because it does get to the root of the problem, but also people that aren't familiar with root cause analysis can get to grips with 5 whys relatively quickly. It's a fairly simple tool to use. And as its name suggests, 5 whys refers to a practice of asking 5 times why has a failure occurred. And by the time you've answered that question 5 times, you're getting somewhere close to the root cause of the problem. So you can map this out in various different ways. I've just put it into a simple table and said, okay, we've captured our concerns from our risk wall, and we've got those in each of the 3 sort of columns across there, and we're going to ask why. And when we ask why, we're going to get because, and we ask why again, and we get because. We ask why again, we get because. You can see the pattern. We ask why, we get because. By the time we ask why for the 5th time, instead of a because, we're probably getting somewhere close to the root cause. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, it's called 5 whys. You don't necessarily have to ask 5 times. If you think you've got to the root cause, if there isn't really another why to ask when you've got to number 4, stop. If you get to number 5 and think, actually, there's another step, then ask it 6 times. You know, it's a general rule. It's called 5 whys because that works, but it doesn't, you know, it's not absolute. You can pick and choose around that a little bit. The important thing is to sort of get to a point where you're getting close to, you know, or right on the root cause of the issue.
Yeah, I would just support the conclusion that we came to here, Lynden, by using 5 whys. Again, it's the whole root cause analysis across the various systems. I've been involved in, you know, as a business, we'll put 10,000 people to work, 2,500 operational staff every day. 5 whys is quite simply the easiest to communicate as a solution. So a big fan, and I would just reiterate the point you're making there is that you can get to the solution in a 2 or 3. You might need 6 or 7, but no longer than that. You know, again, it's about keeping it simple.
Yeah, totally. So we've hopefully now got to a situation where for each of our sort of risk situation or for our failure situations that we've taken from our risk board, we've got down to what we believe to be the root cause of each one of those occurrences. So now we start to think about what's our countermeasure? What do we do? And it's really important now that we start to think about this as, you know, the whole group coming together to think about what countermeasures are suitable for each of those root causes. And again, you can kind of map this out in various different ways. Again, I've captured the items from the risk wall across the top, the root causes from the previous slide I've sort of got coming down the side in the individual rows. And for the purposes of this sort of example, we've assigned 2 countermeasures to each situation. It might be that there's only 1 countermeasure, it might be that there's 3 or 4. The whole point of this is it's not about the number, it's about coming to what is the right countermeasure action that needs to be taken. So, you know, the example shows 2 for each, but again, that's not fixed in stone. You know, there's room to maneuver on that.
So in my view, this is now getting to the pointy end, and the issue at this point of the day is about ownership. This is the serious end of the workshop, and we need to heighten the importance. You know, everyone's had a nice day at the office, perhaps it's been a good lunch, but you now need to, you know, earn your keep and own the outcome. So starting to elevate that to make sure that the importance of what we're doing here is the right thing.
Yeah, and that's the sort of perfect segue into the next bit, which is, you know, we've identified those countermeasures. They need to be turned into an action plan. And again, this needs to be the group coming together to assign action owners for each one of the countermeasures, and importantly, you know, some timescales that we're gonna act in. And again, capture those. However, I've done it quite simply on here. For each one of those countermeasures listed against the concern, we assign an owner, we assign a deadline. It's really important that, you know, only people within the room get an action. If they need support from somebody that's outside of the room, then they can go away and get that, but only people within the pre-mortem exercise get an action. And dates are really important. And it's also key that we, you know, not one person gets sort of thrown under the bus getting all the actions. Everyone's in the room, everyone's got a voice. So if, you know, we need to agree who the best action owner is, whether that's client, designer, supply chain, whoever it is, it needs to be somebody in the room, and they need to be accountable for it. And I think one of the key things from this is, at the moment, this is a plan, and we've now got to make sure that that plan is sort of fully implemented, because the actions that we're now agreeing to to basically enact these countermeasures that we have identified in the pre-mortem are actually given as an action plan to prevent that failure from ever happening in the future, because we've gone to that future state, we've said it's failed, we've worked out what the contributing factors were, we've worked out the root causes, we've worked out what the countermeasures are. Now we can come back to current day and say, well, actually now we've got an action plan to stop this thing ever going wrong in the first place.
And so coming from an assurance world, my recommendation at this stage is to build the need to report against these action plans into your procedures. Don't leave it to chance. Make sure there's a rigor around managing the action plans and getting things done. Don't let the pre-mortem sit on a shelf as a nice day out. So yeah, get it into your procedures, and maybe, ideally flagging it that, if you're doing audits, you can go back and say, ask that question, because you need to be able to follow it through for all the reasons that Lynden just said.
Yeah, and that kind of then brings us full circle, and that gets us to the outcome. And we started off by talking about Matthew Syed's sort of, description of what a pre-mortem was. But if we do the pre-mortem correctly, we can actually change the outcome that he described. If we do this correctly, the patient is not dead, the project hasn't failed, the objectives have been met, and the plans haven't bombed. We've got the ability using this technique to change what happens in the future. And, we talk a lot, and the GIRI researchers, over time has demonstrated that inadequate planning being, the number one root cause of error in the construction industry. And what the pre-mortem tool really is a tool to help us plan to eliminate error on a project as we sort of move that project through to the future. So Richard, I'll sort of hand back to you to kind of any kind of closing thoughts, really.
Yeah, thank you, Lynden. I mean, look at that. We've presented what I believe is a really powerful tool in under half an hour potentially. It's simple to use. You may well have, similar tools within your business, or maybe not even a tool. You do it informally. We just made sure that we gave it a structure, and were able to deploy it as part of the training. So, I hope that you recognise the benefits of it, and even if you can't go off and deploy it, it might make you, encourage you to look at the sort of GIRI, the rest of the GIRI training that this is included in. And I think as an overall conclusion, at GIRI, we recognise that there's a need to develop the right culture throughout the process. So not just at those sort of pre-construction stages, which allows people at the very least to be able to press pause to avoid error. We think more broadly that need to change the way that we work and behave now. If we do that, we will have an industry that's more cost effective and has a better reputation. Thank you very much. And we're over to questions, I guess, Susan.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to, hopefully this will work, just going to allow all the attendees to unmute themselves if they have a question. There are a few questions in the chat already, so we'll start with those, and then if people want to put their hand up, we'll come to questions from individuals once we've gone through the ones in the chat. So there's a question from Chris Parry and a couple of other questions on similar theme about what point in the project life cycle is the best point to do a pre-mortem. So if you've got any thoughts on kind of when in your project life cycle that might be appropriate.
If I go first, Lynden, because your answer might actually be, slightly different. In my experience, these are projects that we have won and we're about to launch. So, generally, I think as a rule, whenever I've done it, we've actually had site cabins on site, and it's that we're just starting to think about putting foundations in, and the team are together. We got all the right people around the table, because you're looking for that ownership from end to end. It maybe, if you go too early, for me, you go too early, it might be people that become disconnected and aren't involved in delivering that action plan. So is on the cusp of a project starting for me.
Yeah, I think, I've got some experience of doing it a little bit earlier than that. We've done it on a couple of projects where, again, the contract's being awarded, and I think it's about having, as best as you can, some certainty about the people that are going to be in the room still being sort of involved in that project to drive the actions forward. So, and again, Richard mentioned it, it's really key to sort of try and get the client there and the designer and, the sort of contractors and the key members of the supply chain So I think the earlier in a project you can do it, the better. But that said, there's nothing to then stop you halfway through a project if there's a particular area coming up that's kind of big concern about, how do we build this bridge? How do we put this, how do we, do this building? How do we do this section? Then actually running a pre-mortem exercise halfway through a project is still valid, because you still get you're still using it as that planning tool to end up with the right result. But from a concept, sort of doing it kind of in the early stages of the project, I think is typically when you do it.
I think this is you've probably answered most of this, but David Nash's question in the chat was about how you integrate pre-mortems into your project planning process, and do you make it a required part of the process to do this for any new phases of work? So that
I would say yes. Yeah, again, I would say yes and yes. I think if you create that structure around it, and to be fair, I've not done one where there hasn't been a positive outcome at the beginning that would suggest the team wouldn't carry it on. The discipline, as I said, for me was getting you almost needed to be part of the procedures for people to report against their action plans. It's a good thing to do at the beginning of a project. There is maybe the pressure of delivering that project isn't starting to ramp up quite as much. You then move into the proper delivery phase, and getting people to remember that there is an action plan, manage that action plan. It might slip off the radar. So getting it written into your procedures or your reporting cycle so that individuals are called to account to report on their action plan is really important.
Yeah, I wouldn't sort of disagree with any of that. And I think, it as we sort of said, this is, this was developed as part of GIRI training, and it forms probably, the one day sort of project leaders workshop. This is kind of half of that day. And obviously, as Susan mentioned at the beginning, there are other training streams as well with the interfaces and the supervisors and managers. And I think the power of all this stuff is when you can kind of bring all of it to bear, so that you've not just got a kind of a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. The people, the managers are talking a language that the people out on the project are talking the same kind of language, and that's when you kind of get, I think, the perfect storm. And actually, the GIRI training, all the streams of it are full of things that you can actually take away and use again and again. It's not just useful on the training day that you think, oh, actually that was quite useful, but I'll never use that again. Pre-mortem is just one example of behaviors and things that you learn during that training that you can sort of take forward and use over and over again through the project and then into the next one.
Great. There's a question from Michael Anderson about countermeasures. So when considering countermeasures, do you consider the practicality and the cost of implementation?
Yeah, again, I would say that's sort of part and parcel. Again, to some extent, the action plan can be as detailed as you need it to be. But, the recommendation I would have is exactly that. They need to be priced up and included as part of that delivery, and included in a whole cost assessment of the impact of what you're trying to achieve, because it's an investment to avoid a defect at the end of the project, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think part of it is the very fact that you've kind of put yourself into this situation where we've gone into the future, the patient is dead, the project has failed, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of a balance of, well, how much money would you be spending at that point to fix it? So when you then put your countermeasures in place, it'd be very easy to come up to say that a countermeasure is going to cost too much money. But actually, if you think about it in terms of, the 21% of sort of cost of error, and try and sort of make that balance, don't dismiss everything just because it's going to cost some money. But absolutely, it's got to have some practicality. It's got to be, it's got to be affordable, and it's got to be practically, doable. We can't just put in countermeasures that, cost, millions and millions of pounds for something that, we're not sure is going to happen. So it's got to be pragmatic, I think.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of people with hands up. So Roxy, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Roxy, can I just say, I know you work with Galliford Try. Please don't make this an awkward question.
That's good, it might be.
Let me make my camera on. Okay, Lynden, I try to. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was so informative for me, actually, because my project is specifically targeting the error in construction. but using AI, not human judgment. And I'm still having some concerns apart from these real concerns, because human are biased and we all know that we are biased. And I mean, in terms of this group session to identify the concerns, I think there are still some biases to need to consider, that maybe people when trying to write down some concerns, having concerns of being accused of responsibility or accountability. So, I mean, when I was reviewing some literature in the rework and in terms of, I mean, error reduction, I found out some really good articles that maybe, I mean, GIRI research about it for sure, but I didn't find in the GIRI research report. But there are some heuristics about some unavoidable error, and which also mentioned about Rumsfeld heuristic, maybe you know about it, which said that there are unknown unknowns. So in terms of this unavoidable error, wouldn't it be good to shift their mindset instead of eliminate error or reduce the error, to manage the error? Actually, this is not my suggestion. This is what the literature review suggested, that to not point out to people that who was the, I mean, responsible, who are accountable of these defects or latent defects, to just manage the error and not to reduce it, not to eliminate it, because there are some errors that we cannot eliminate. And I think that leverage AI at even in this pre-mortem approach could be useful to think about, I mean, for the future, Lynden, because maybe in terms of identify the prioritizing the concerns and finding the common or commonality between these concerns, AI could help. But yeah, overall, I really enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
You want to go first, Lyndon? There's a bit to unpack in there.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of, should we talk about managing error rather than eliminating, no, I can't speak now, rather than eliminating error? No, I don't think we should, because I think that's kind of, you know, we've spent a lot of time and doing the hard yards in health and safety to sort of get ourselves to a position where, you know, we don't accept that accidents are just going to happen and then figure out what size of first aid kit we need to kind of deal with it. You know, we very much get now from a cultural approach, you know, the intention that all accidents are avoidable. And yes, there are the unknown unknowns. And, you know, if we ever get to the point where we manage to eliminate all accidents, then we'll be doing incredibly well. And I think the same is true for error. You know, there are so many things that we can predict, whether that's from personal experience or whether it's by being able to use AI, so that we've got, you know, something kind of suggesting what the concerns might be that doesn't rely on human kind of input. That's a possibility, but I don't think we should get to the point where we just say error's going to happen, let's manage it. I think that the driver's got to be, you know, to plan and eliminate as much as we possibly can. And then hopefully the ones that do occur, you know, will be small and easily managed, rather than the kind of big ticket items that take a lot of time and cost a lot of money, and then put people at risk from a health and safety perspective again, because we're doing rework. So, you know, I think we've got to eliminate is the right thing.
Yeah. But you know, I'd add to the, and it's not on this topic, but is a wider GIRI issue. So this concept of being able to predict error using AI, you know, it's got to be the future. I've said this for a long time. We all sit on a lot of data. We can do it with accidents, I'm sure. Certainly be able to do it with quality. And it does bring up a broader topic that we've struggled with GIRI. We've had a couple of goes at trying to get the cost of error. As an industry, we're not too inclined, you know, with us being on 2% margins and below, you know, why would I share my error data with a broader market that might be sort of, you know, used against me? So we're doing stuff with Consig at the moment to see whether there is an opportunity to collaborate as industry partners to share that data, because I think that would absolutely start to get to a place where we could predict. I always imagined, you know, you could take our pre-mortem meeting here as that you've dialed in, you know exactly what the project's going to be, and you've got two schedules, one that tells you the likely accidents that you've got to avoid and what the likely errors are going to be on that particular project. So we're only going to get there though if we can share data, because when you start going mining for quality data across construction, you know, it is a struggle because we just won't share it because we don't have a legal requirement to.
Just to pick up on the AI point, we have just commissioned a new report around the use of AI in reducing errors that will be coming out later this year, which will be hopefully a really useful tool for people.
Yes.
Marl, I think, did you have a question? If you'd like to unmute yourself, you can ask your question. Hopefully you can.
Yeah. There you are. Yep. See you.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Marwa El Sheikh. I am the head of risk for East West Rail Company. I work majority of my life with client organization, and I've used the pre-mortem approach quite a few times. And I totally agree with everything being stated about the benefit of it, about the importance of having client organization designers with their supply chain in a room and having them as a big mixed group to ensure we get the benefit of the pre-mortem. And equally having it as early as we could, leading on a particular task, whether it is a change program, a contract set out, or a planning approach. I wonder whether the panel have faced challenging circumstances when running these pre-mortem workshops, i.e. not getting the outcomes sometimes you were aiming for, and whether there was some tips to counteract these circumstances.
Yeah. So to be fair, I've not done loads. I mean, they're just a few within my organisation, and today, they've worked. I guess the experience that I was sharing was that piece around being regimented a bit in the action plans. I know there were a couple that I went back into, and we hit off the big tickets. We knew, they rose to the top. People knew that was going to be an issue, and we drove it. But in some of the latter ones, you could see that the more tricky stuff had not been followed through. Whether the defect had then surfaced, but what people weren't doing was reporting against it to keep the pressure on. I don't know about you, Lynden.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had situations where some people don't necessarily buy into the concept as quickly and as easily as others. So some people kind of view it, they kind of be quite guarded when they come into the session, whether it's because people are working for different organizations. But as I say, the key is, and we've been lucky that, we've used GIRI training and consultancy, and they've got some very good facilitators as well to sort of, to basically get people into that kind of comfortable space. But I think every session that we've done, even though it might not go the way you think it does always, there's always something that comes out of it that you think, do you know what, if that is just the one thing, yes, it's cost a lot of money to put this event on, and people have spent a lot of time, and that stacks up to quite a lot of expenditure from a time and money point of view. But actually, if that creates one countermeasure that prevents one error, then it's money well spent, time and time again. So I think the skill is with the sort of facilitator sort of trying to bring everybody together in the room and everybody buying into it with equal voice, I think is the real key.
I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question because Steve, you've been waiting patiently. So if you want to unmute yourself, and then we'll wrap things up. If I haven't got to your question, please do email me and we'll try and respond after the session. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, Steve Everton at Jacobs. Thank you very much. I think I've been doing something like this, but with no formality for a good few years, what ifs and scenarios, and I really like having a little bit of structure behind it. A couple of harsh questions, or one question, have you got any examples of successes that we could take away and say this has worked really well? Or perhaps if you did this at the beginning of Grenfell or Carmont or Baltimore Bridge or one of those things in the last 5 years, do you think you would have spotted some of the things that happened out of the last 10 years failures? Do you hope you'll spot those things?
Yeah,
it's a harsh question.
No, I think it's I think it's a good question. I've seen it there, and sort of starting to prepare it in my head. I think that is, you'd like to think so. You would like to think that you go back to the way that Lynden explained it. Is any possibility is any issue you could put on the table, and so therefore some of the you'd like to think in Grenfell you would have pulled what would happen if there was a fire. I mean, and maybe diving a lot deeper in the defects that were in there, you'd like to think you could pull some of them out. I mean, there's certainly people with the benefit of hindsight that would have easily identified them. It's easy to look back on Grenfell and think that was 30 years in the making. So I'd like to think you could. from the way that, providing the workshops are open, you don't stifle any of that thought. You let people put it on the table, definitely. In terms of examples, I guess my hotel to date has been open 5 years and hasn't had a leak. So maybe we did get that bit right. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, just to sort of reiterate, I mean, there is a case study on the GIRI website, which was a project that we did up in Grantham in Lincolnshire, where it was a particular piling technique for a top-down construction bridge, and we'd done one similar previously and had some horrendous problems with it. And we took those problems into a pre-mortem, and we got good buy-in from the client and the designer, and really importantly the piling contractor. And actually some things came out of that hadn't affected us on the previous project. So actually some good ideas came out of it. But what we did there was a very detailed plan came out of that going forward. And thankfully, we didn't have any repeat problems on that project from a piling perspective. Could we 100% say that those problems would never have happened if we hadn't done the pre-mortem? Maybe not, but that doesn't really matter. The fact is, we learned some lessons, we took them forward in a positive way, and we prevented error from happening on that project. So I think it's about, as much as anything, learning from experiences and making sure that we don't have repeat errors. Having an error once is bad, but then repeating it time and time again is criminal. So that's
Professor Reason, who's not long passed away, is Swiss cheese model. You'd like to think that this session or a pre-mortem session might just make one of those barriers stop the error getting through, because there's all sorts of, the lady who said there was the unknowns, there's all those kind of things. But if you can just, by a bit of forward thinking and what ifs and scenario planning, get one of those barriers more robust, I think that's a really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're over time slightly, so we'll draw things to a close, but thank you everybody for your great questions, and any that we didn't manage to get to, we will pick them up from the chat and get back to you with responses on those. Thank you to Richard and Lynden for a great presentation. Lots of really positive comments in the chat. And I'll also dig out that case study from our website. If anyone's interested in it, just drop me an email and I can send you a direct link to that. So yeah, any other queries afterwards, I've put my email address in the chat. Happy to pick up questions, but thank you all so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.